My father-in-law stood up at his own anniversary party, raised a glass, pointed directly at me, and called me a gold digger in front of more than 100 guests. Laughter echoed through the ballroom. Some people exchanged uncomfortable glances while others openly enjoyed the spectacle. My husband sat beside me and said nothing. What none of them knew was that less than 18 hours later, a single phone call would shatter everything they believed about me. My name is Bryn Carter, and for years I had mastered the art of staying silent when the Hale family underestimated me. The anniversary celebration was held in an extravagant hotel ballroom decorated with crystal chandeliers, expensive flowers, and enough luxury to remind every guest of the Hale family's influence. At the center of it all stood Vance Hale, the family patriarch, a man who had never hidden his belief that I was unworthy of his son. As he delivered his toast, his words shifted from sentimental memories to personal attacks. He accused me of marrying Dawson for money, implying I had carefully planned my way into the family fortune. Murmurs spread across the room. Some guests stared at me with pity while others looked relieved that they weren't the target. I waited for Dawson to defend me. He never did. His silence hurt more than Vance's accusations. It confirmed something I had been trying to ignore for a long time. Despite the humiliation, I remained calm. I offered a polite smile, lifted my glass, and refused to give anyone the reaction they expected. The truth was that Vance knew almost nothing about me. He had spent years judging me based on assumptions while remaining completely unaware of the secrets hidden behind my quiet life. As the evening continued, the Hale family celebrated their success. They believed they understood exactly who I was. By the next day they would learn how wrong they had been. Long after the anniversary party ended, I sat alone in the dark living room, replaying every moment in my mind. Vance Hale's accusation had shocked many of the guests, but it hadn't surprised me. In truth, it was only the latest chapter in a story that had begun years earlier. From the day Dawson introduced me to his family, Vance treated me like an outsider. He never openly forbade the relationship, but his disapproval was impossible to miss. Every compliment carried a hidden insult. Every family gathering felt like a test I was expected to fail. No matter what I accomplished, he viewed me as a woman who had attached herself to his son for financial security. At first, I tried to earn his respect. I attended family events, supported company charities, and remained polite even when his comments crossed the line. Over time, I realized nothing would ever change his opinion. Vance had already decided who I was, and facts would never matter. What made his judgment so ironic was that he knew almost nothing about my life before Dawson. Years before I met my husband, I had built a technology company from the ground up. I worked endless hours, sacrificed relationships, and risked everything on an idea that most investors dismissed. Against the odds, the company succeeded. When I eventually sold it, the deal made me wealthier than many people in the circles Vance admired. I never spoke publicly about the sale. Wealth attracted the wrong kind of attention, and I wanted relationships based on genuine connection rather than status. When Dawson and I met, I deliberately kept my finances private. I wanted to be valued for who I was, not for what I owned. The secret remained hidden even after our marriage. While Vance continued portraying me as a fortune hunter, I quietly used my resources to help protect the Hale business during difficult periods. Whenever financial problems threatened the company, money from investments connected to me helped stabilize operations. The man who spent years calling me a gold digger had no idea that his family's success depended, in part, on the woman he refused to respect. The days following the anniversary party felt different. Vance's public humiliation had exposed something I could no longer ignore. For years, I had blamed most of the tension in my life on my father-in-law's prejudice, convincing myself that Dawson was simply caught between his wife and his family. Now, for the first time, I began questioning whether that explanation had ever been true. The more I reflected on our marriage, the more troubling patterns emerged. There had been countless moments when I shared private thoughts with Dawson, only to hear those same details repeated later by Vance. At first, I dismissed it as coincidence. Families talk, I told myself. Information travels. Yet the incidents kept happening with uncomfortable precision. When I expressed concerns about company decisions during conversations with Dawson, Vance somehow learned about them within days. Personal opinions I had shared in confidence later resurfaced during family dinners. Even vulnerable moments from our marriage occasionally found their way into Vance's remarks, disguised as jokes or casual observations. Each time it happened, Dawson had an explanation. Someone must have overheard. Vance was making assumptions. The timing was coincidental. I wanted to believe him, so I accepted excuses that now seemed painfully obvious. Looking back, I realized how often Dawson had remained silent when his father criticized me. He rarely joined the attacks, but he almost never stopped them either. Whenever conflict arose, he chose neutrality. At the time, I interpreted his behavior as an attempt to keep peace within the family. Now it felt more like quiet permission. The realization unsettled me more than Vance's insults ever had. A father-in-law's hostility was painful, but betrayal from a spouse was something entirely different. Dawson was supposed to be the one person I could trust without question. If he had been sharing information with Vance all along, then the problem was much larger than family disapproval. Late one evening, I reviewed years of memories through a new lens. For the first time, I considered a possibility I had spent years avoiding. Maybe Vance wasn't acting alone. Maybe the person helping him undermine me had been sitting beside me the entire time. The morning after my sleepless night of reflection, my phone rang just after 8 o'clock. I almost ignored it. My head still ached from everything that had happened at the anniversary party, and I had no interest in speaking to anyone connected to the Hale family. When I saw the caller's name, however, I immediately answered. It was Graham Reed, Vance Hale's longtime attorney. Graham was known for being calm, measured, and impossible to rattle. Yet the tension in his voice was obvious from the moment he spoke. After a brief greeting, he asked if we could meet privately as soon as possible. The urgency caught me off guard. Less than an hour later, I arrived at his office. Graham wasted no time. He closed the door, placed several confidential files on the table, and informed me that legal disclosures scheduled for the coming weeks would reveal information that could no longer remain hidden. As he explained the situation, I felt the room grow quieter around me. For years, the Hale Company had faced financial difficulties that few outsiders knew about. Several times major projects had come close to collapse. Emergency investments had appeared at critical moments, providing stability when traditional funding sources failed. Vance believed those rescues came from a network of loyal investors and business partners. The truth was far different. Those investments were connected to entities I controlled. Through carefully structured holdings established years earlier, I had quietly provided support whenever the company faced serious risk. My involvement had remained hidden behind layers of legal protections, making it nearly impossible for anyone to trace the funds back to me. Graham revealed that upcoming ownership reviews and corporate restructuring would finally expose the full picture. The disclosure process had uncovered the extent of my holdings throughout the organization. Then he delivered the revelation that changed everything. Based on current records, I had become the largest individual stakeholder in the entire Hale empire. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Vance still believed I was a woman chasing family wealth. Dawson still thought I held little influence inside the company. Neither of them realized that the balance of power had already shifted, and very soon everyone would know. After my meeting with Graham, I couldn't stop thinking about one question. How had so many people inside the company consistently underestimated my influence? The answer seemed obvious at first, because I had chosen to remain private. Yet as I reviewed the documents he provided, another possibility emerged. Someone had been working against me behind the scenes. What began as a routine review of ownership records quickly turned into something far more disturbing. Graham granted me access to confidential reports connected to past investments and corporate decisions. As I examined the files, Unusual patterns began to appear. Several business strategies that should have remained confidential had somehow become known to people who were never authorized to see them. Internal discussions linked to my investment entities had been exposed long before official announcements. Opportunities that could have increased my influence were repeatedly blocked at critical moments. At first, I assumed the leaks came from someone within the company's financial departments. Large organizations often struggle with confidentiality. But the deeper I looked, the narrower the list of possibilities became. The information being shared was too specific. Some of it could only have come from conversations that took place outside the office. Private conversations. Conversations I had shared with Dawson. A cold feeling settled over me as I compared timelines. Discussions I had with my husband would later surface in meetings involving Vance. Concerns I expressed in confidence somehow found their way into decisions designed to limit my involvement. The pattern repeated too many times to be dismissed as coincidence. Then I discovered communications that connected everything. The evidence suggested that Dawson had repeatedly provided information to his father while presenting himself as my supporter. Publicly, he acted like a husband trying to keep peace between two stubborn personalities. Privately, he appeared to be helping Vance monitor and counter my influence. The realization was devastating. The anniversary speech suddenly looked very different. What I had assumed was a drunken outburst now appeared to be part of a much larger effort to undermine me. Vance may have delivered the insult, but he wasn't acting alone. For years, I had been defending my marriage. Now I was forced to consider the possibility that the person I trusted most had been betraying me all along. After meeting with Graham, I resisted the urge to confront Dawson or Vance. The evidence I had already seen was disturbing, but emotions could cloud judgment. If I was going to uncover the truth, I needed facts, not assumptions. I began quietly assembling a team of professionals who had no connection to the Hale family. Forensic accountants reviewed years of financial records. Corporate investigators examined ownership structures, internal communications, and confidential transactions. Experienced attorneys analyzed every document connected to the company's major decisions. No one outside the investigation knew what I was doing. The process took weeks. Every report that landed on my desk revealed another layer of deception. At first, the findings focused on business matters. Certain decisions had been made without proper disclosure. Information had been selectively shared with board members. Strategic opportunities that could have strengthened my position had been quietly redirected elsewhere. Individually, each incident seemed minor. Together, they formed a pattern that was impossible to ignore. Then the investigation became personal. Communications recovered from internal records suggested that Dawson and Vance had privately discussed ways to limit my influence inside the company. They viewed me as a potential threat rather than a trusted family member. Even after years of loyalty, they had continued treating me as an outsider whose involvement needed to be controlled. Reading those documents was more painful than any public insult. I remembered the holidays, celebrations, and family dinners where I had genuinely tried to belong. I remembered defending Dawson when others questioned him and supporting him through difficult moments. While I was investing my trust in the family, they were planning how to protect themselves from me. What hurt most was realizing how long it had been happening. This wasn't a reaction to a recent disagreement or misunderstanding. The strategy stretched back years. Long before the anniversary party, long before Vance publicly humiliated me, they had already decided that I would never be fully accepted. By the time the investigation concluded, the facts were undeniable. The people I had trusted most did not see me as family. They saw me as an obstacle. And with every document I reviewed, my determination grew stronger. I was no longer searching for answers. I was preparing for what came next. Once the investigation was complete, I stopped focusing on what Dawson and Vance had done and started concentrating on what I would do next. The anger and disappointment were still there, but emotions no longer controlled my decisions. Every betrayal had taught me a lesson, and now I intended to use that knowledge wisely. For years, I had built investments quietly and strategically. While the Hale family assumed I played a minor role in their world, I had been creating a financial foundation of my own. The structures were complex, spread across multiple entities and long-term holdings designed to protect both privacy and flexibility. Most people never questioned them because they never imagined they were connected to me. Now those investments gave me options. Working closely with Graham and my legal team, I began executing a plan that had never originally been intended as a weapon. My goal had always been to strengthen valuable assets and create stability. Yet the same strategy could also provide control. Carefully and legally, additional shares were acquired through existing agreements and investment vehicles. Opportunities that others ignored became stepping stones. Every move was reviewed, documented, and timed with precision. Nothing was rushed. The remarkable part was that no one seemed to notice. Vance remained focused on maintaining his authority, convinced that he understood every corner of the company he had spent decades building. Dawson continued moving through board meetings with confidence, believing his position inside the organization was secure. Neither of them suspected that ownership was quietly shifting beneath their feet. As weeks passed, my influence expanded. For the first time in years, I no longer felt trapped by their opinions or dependent on their approval. Their assumptions had become my greatest advantage. Because they underestimated me, they failed to recognize what was happening right in front of them. I attended meetings, answered questions, and maintained the same calm presence they expected. Outwardly, nothing appeared different. Behind the scenes, everything was changing. The woman they dismissed as a gold digger was steadily gaining control of the empire they believed belonged exclusively to them. Every signature brought me closer to the moment when the truth would become impossible to hide. And when that day arrived, the balance of power would belong entirely to me. The special board meeting was scheduled with little warning. Officially, it was called to discuss corporate restructuring and ownership disclosures. Nothing about the agenda appeared unusual, which was exactly why neither Vance nor Dawson suspected what was coming. On the morning of the meeting, I arrived early and took my seat near the end of the conference table. The atmosphere felt routine. Board members exchanged greetings, reviewed documents, and discussed ordinary business matters while waiting for the session to begin. Vance entered with the confidence of a man who believed he controlled every outcome in the room. Dawson followed beside him, relaxed and self-assured. Neither of them spared me more than a passing glance. When the meeting started, Graham Reed stood and began presenting the restructuring report. At first, the information was technical and uneventful. Financial summaries appeared on screens. Ownership percentages were reviewed. Several board members nodded as they followed the presentation. Then Graham moved to the final section. The room gradually fell silent. One document led to another as layers of ownership were revealed. Investment entities previously believed to be unrelated were shown to be connected. Years of acquisitions, transfers, and holdings were carefully mapped out before the board. Confusion appeared on several faces. Then understanding followed. As the presentation continued, a single conclusion became impossible to ignore. The largest ownership position in the company belonged to one person. Me. For a moment nobody spoke. Vance stared at the screen as though it contained a mistake. His expression shifted from disbelief to shock. The man who had spent years questioning my motives could barely process what he was seeing. The woman he had publicly labeled a gold digger now controlled more of the company than anyone else in the room. Dawson looked equally stunned. But Graham wasn't finished. Additional documents were presented showing confidential information leaks, internal communications, and evidence gathered during the investigation. The pattern was clear. Sensitive company information had repeatedly been shared in ways that undermined my position and violated trust. As board members reviewed the evidence, Dawson's confidence disappeared completely. The meeting he expected to control had become something entirely different. For the first time, the truth stood in full view of everyone, and there was no way to hide from it anymore. After the board reviewed the ownership disclosures and evidence of internal leaks, All eyes turned toward me. For years, I had remained silent while others told stories about who I was. They called me an opportunist, an outsider, and a woman chasing a fortune that was never hers. Now, for the first time, I had the chance to tell the truth. I rose from my seat and looked around the room. I never married Dawson for money, I began. The truth is that long before I met anyone in this family, I built a company of my own. The room remained silent as I explained the journey few people knew about. I spoke about the years of risk, long nights, and sacrifices required to transform an idea into a successful technology business. I described the sale that had provided financial independence long before the Hale name entered my life. Many board members looked stunned. For years, they had accepted the same assumptions Vance had promoted. None of them had imagined that the woman sitting quietly at the end of the table possessed a fortune built entirely through her own efforts. Then I revealed something even more significant. I explained how investment entities connected to me had repeatedly provided support during some of the company's most difficult periods. When projects faced collapse and funding disappeared, resources under my control helped stabilize operations. I never sought recognition, ownership battles, or public praise. I simply wanted to protect the people and business I believed were part of my future. Finally, I turned toward Dawson. The disappointment I felt was deeper than anger. I detailed the confidential conversations that had been shared, the information that had repeatedly found its way to Vance, and the pattern of decisions designed to limit my influence. Every fact was supported by evidence already sitting in front of the board. Dawson offered no defense. For the first time, he had nothing to hide behind. Across the room, Vance's expression changed. The certainty that had defined him for years was gone. He finally understood the cost of his prejudice. The company he believed he had protected survived because of the woman he never trusted. And the family he tried to control had fallen apart because he refused to see the truth. The boardroom remained silent after the evidence was presented. Vance sat motionless, staring at documents that had dismantled years of assumptions. Dawson avoided eye contact with everyone around him. The truth was finally exposed, and neither of them could explain it away. I could have celebrated the moment. I could have reminded them of every insult, every accusation, and every attempt to diminish me. Instead, I remained calm. Revenge had never been about humiliating them. It was about reclaiming my future. When the final ownership votes were completed, the transition of control became official. The company I had quietly protected for years was now under my leadership. Every decision had been made legally, transparently, and with the support of the board. No dramatic confrontation was necessary. The facts spoke for themselves. Vance attempted to argue, insisting that the company belonged to the family he had spent decades building. But ownership records told a different story. His authority had been replaced by reality. For the first time in years, he found himself powerless to change the outcome. Dawson's situation was even more painful. The investigation had revealed enough evidence to justify his removal from several key positions within the organization. Board members who once trusted him could no longer overlook the breaches of confidence and questionable decisions. One by one, the privileges he had taken for granted disappeared. After the meeting ended, I handed my attorney the final paperwork. Among the documents was a divorce filing. Dawson looked at me as though he expected an argument, an emotional speech, or one last opportunity to repair what had been broken. I offered none of those things. Some betrayals reach a point where explanations no longer matter. Without anger or hesitation, I walked away. Months later, the company was stronger than it had been in years. Employees had stability, investors had confidence, and the future looked brighter than ever. As for Vance and Dawson, they were left to confront the consequences of their own choices. They had spent years underestimating me. In the end, their downfall wasn't caused by my revenge. It was caused by their belief that I was never capable of winning.